Hope everyone's had a good day today. Good to see each one of you this evening. This morning we began looking at a lesson entitled Getting More Out of Life. We took as our lesson text Ecclesiastes chapter 11. And this evening we're going to pick up where we left off this morning in verse 7. Notice this reading with me. The light is pleasant, and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all, and let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. Everything that is to come will be futility. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Ecclesiastes 11, verses 7 through 10. This morning we examined the fact that due to the vanities of life, those things that come along that are meaningless, are empty, that do not have an impact upon our spiritual being, we need to focus upon those things that aid us in living a better life. In Solomon, he shows us here in these first 6 verses that we looked at this morning that this is something that we simply have to act in faith. We have to take that step. We have to put something into our service to God if we really want to get more out of this life. If we want to live a better life, then we're going to have to put something into it. Well, tonight we're going to look at a few more of these suggestions that Solomon gives to us, showing us, number one, things that we need to remove from life, but then things that need to be put into its place so that we can live a better life. First, in verse 7, it says, the light is pleasant, and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. Solomon is telling us that life is to be enjoyed. It is not to be endured. But many people in the world around us today have a very dismal idea of what the Christian life is really all about. So often the image that they have of Christians are those who walk around very somber, or they walk around with their noses up in the air, or they walk around almost terrified at every step that they take because they're afraid that they might do the wrong thing, they might say the wrong thing. Like we talked about this morning, always having this mentality that what we're doing is not what God wants us to do, and so we're always scared about it. Well, so many in the world, they look at this and they say, well, why would I want to live a life that I cannot enjoy? Why would I want to live a life that seems more like a struggle, like an endurance on my part? Well, Solomon tells us that this life is one that is supposed to be enjoyed. It is not to be seen as a struggle. Whenever we look at the Old Testament, oftentimes we see this word light used in reference to the goodness and the joy that should be in this life. In Job, the 18th chapter, verses 5 and 6, it says, indeed, the light of the wicked goes out, and the flame of his fire gives no light. The light in his tent is darkened, and his lamp goes out from above. And then the psalmist in Psalm 97 and verse 11 says, light is sown like seed for the righteous, and gladness for the upright in heart. So what Solomon is proclaiming is that although there are these many vanities in life, life has its good qualities. Life has its good aspects. And those are the things that we need to focus upon. Those are the areas of life where we can find true joy as we pursue this righteous living. But you may be wondering, why do we need to do that? Why does Solomon even take the time to acknowledge that? That seems like such a given, such a simple point. Well, as I mentioned a while ago, There are some who take this view of Christianity, and sadly, there are some Christians who live their life in such a way that this is what they're showing the world, that we're not enjoying life. By the way that they are displaying themselves to the world looks at them and says, well, why would I want to live that way? Folks, I've told you before, some of the most negative people that I have ever met were those who were supposed to be Christians. Some of the most discouraging, some of the saddest people, ones that we could truly say are living a miserable life. And these are ones who are supposed to be children of God. But what leads to this? You know, it could be that that's how you were raised. It could be that you were brought up in a home to where you were not allowed to express emotions, express your feelings, to really find that joy in life. Or it may be that you grew up in surroundings where it was not a very happy time. I know that there are many who grew up at different periods in history where it was a very difficult time in the history of our country. And so you may have developed this attitude of defense about everything that comes along. But something that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes is both Solomon and God giving us a resounding wrong. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. This is not the way that those who are righteous, who are faithful to God, this is not the outlook that we should have on life. This is not the behavior that we are to exemplify. We're to be happy people, Don. We're to find joy in this life. But if anyone has what is available to us, if anyone has a purpose for being happy, folks, it's you and I. You look at the blessings that have been poured out upon us. You look at the gift of Jesus' sacrifice. You look at the many ways that God continues to guide us and bless us each and every day. Folks, of all people, we should be the most happy. We have so much to be happy for. We go all the way back into the beginning and we find that God is not the one that was the creator of negativity. God was not the creator of vanity. That was Satan. Satan was the one that came along and he saw how much joy that Adam and Eve was having there in the garden. Folks, you read about what God provided for them. They were literally in a paradise. They were happy. But then Satan came along. And he began to put those doubts into their mind. He began to produce this vanity, and ultimately they gave in. They took their eyes off of what really mattered. And they gave in. Well, from that point on, we know how their life was. It was much more difficult. Many more struggles came along as a result of that. So in spite of this inevitable vanity that is going to come along, we must remember that there is joy to be had in the Christian life. We need to find it, and we need to focus upon that. The next point that Solomon makes is that every phase of life is to be enjoyed. You know, there is or can be certain things about every stage of life that produce joy within us. In verse 8 he says, "Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all." Now there may be times in life that we have to really look for those positives. There may be times that we struggle with our health. There may be times that we have other issues going on, and we really have to look for those things that produce joy. But Solomon tells us they're there. They're there. If we look for them, we will find them. Now, obviously, it's easier to find good at certain points in life than at others. Oftentimes, we think about youth. We think about the innocence. We think about the optimism that is there. We think about the goodness and the kindness that we see in children. We see the joy in that even if they do get upset, give them a couple minutes and they're going to bounce back the other direction. But then as we grow, and as the world begins to impact us more and more, we find that there's more of this vanity that begins to come into our lives. And there are certain things that we don't enjoy. Like for example, folks, is there anybody here who really likes the effects of aging? I mean, think about that. Is there anyone here that can honestly say that you enjoy going and looking in the mirror every morning and seeing the changes that has on your body? Or you try to crawl out of bed in the morning and you have a few more aches and pains than what you had the day before. You know, there are certain things that are just not pleasant. Certain aspects of life that it's inevitable. We're not going to like it. We're not going to enjoy those things. But rather than focusing upon the negatives, rather than complaining about the things that we cannot change, we need to be looking for those unique joys that are there at every stage of life. It doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or if you're 95 years old. You can find joy in this life. And that's what Solomon is trying to help us understand. The joys of a 5-year-old and the joys of a 95-year-old are going to be vastly different. But we still are able to find that joy. And Solomon gives us a very sobering reason for this. Notice the second part of verse 8. He says, "Let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many." Folks, this is merely a poetic way of saying you need to get started now enjoying life because it's not going to last forever. Eventually, it's going to reach the point where this life comes to an end. So enjoy the time that you have in this life. But you know, something that Solomon did not know. And so often we think about Solomon being this wise man endued with great wisdom by God. But do you know there's something that you and I are able to know that Solomon did not know? We know what lies after death. We know that what lies ahead is not days of darkness. We know that what lies ahead is something glorious. It is a blessing. However, it's going to be different from this life. And Solomon here, he's not addressing what's going to happen in the life to come. He is addressing the here and now. The way we're living this life and enjoying this life. That's what we need to focus upon. This is why the psalmist tells us in Psalm 90 and verse 12, "So teach us to number our days that we may present to thee a heart of wisdom." He says, think about the time that you have here. Realize that it's not going to be all that long. And make the most of it that you can. Going back to what we talked about this morning. Leaping out there in faith, taking those steps, taking those risks, knowing that when you cast that bread of righteous living out upon the waters, you will be rewarded in the end. Being willing to do that. And remember, Jesus said in John 9 and verse 4 that we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day, for night is coming when no man can work. Jesus, of course, here is referring to himself and his ministry, but this applies to us as well. While we are here, let us work these works of God. Let us be involved in our faith. Folks, if we take just a casual, flippant, passive view of our faith, then we're really not receiving the blessings that we should be receiving. We're not going to find that joy and that peace and that satisfaction that really comes from putting our all into living the Christian life. Therefore, we have to be willing to seek out that joy. Number 3, don't waste your youth. Don't waste your youth. Now, I know that most of us here tonight, it's been a long time since we were able to be called youths. But Solomon presents a concept to us here that is very powerful and something that we need to be stressing to our young people, to our children, to our grandchildren. And that is, do not waste the prime of your life. Notice what he says in verse 9. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. Folks, it is during the time of childhood and adolescence that most people determine the course that their life is going to take. When you stop and you consider the fact that it is during adolescence that most people become a child of God. You look at the statistics, and as you move out of your teenage years into your 20s and 30s and so on, the chances of a person becoming a child of God drops drastically every 5 years. Most people become a child of God during their teenage years. But it's also during that time that we determine what career we want to take, where we want to live, what the course of life is that we're going to follow after. But also during this time, we're developing our personality. We are developing our outlook on life. What is that outlook going to be? You know, so often we hear people make the statement, have a good day. But a while back, I had someone make a statement to me that really struck me that I thought, you know, that's a better saying. They said, make it a good day. You ever thought about that? Make it a good day. If our initiative, our outlook is that we're going to wake up every day and make it the best day that we can, that day's not going to be wasted. Even if it is a day of sadness, even if it is a day of turmoil, we're still going to be looking for those good things that are a part of that day. Solomon goes on in verse 10, he says, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body. Now we understand that there is no way to completely remove all pain from this physical life. Whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whatever the case may be, we cannot remove all pain from our life. However, we can remove certain things from our life. We can take certain steps that will prevent us from suffering in certain ways. And so much of this, once again, is something that we develop during our youth. You know, we think about some of the habits that we have. We think about some of the things that we begin to engage in early in life, and then we think about the physical effects that it has on it as we get that it has on us as we get older. Those are things that we developed from a young age. Solomon says, remove those things. Remove those things that are going to produce pain for you later on. And we're not just talking about physical. You look at the kinds of situations that people get themselves in today in regard to their relationships. You look at those, folks, I shared with you a while back, I know a young lady who's not even 30 years old yet, and she's been married and divorced 3 times. And then years down the line, what's going to happen if that person decides that they want to become a faithful Christian? And then they look at the status that their life is in at that point. So many of these struggles, so many of these trials and things that we face in this life are things that we've brought on ourselves. Solomon says that as a young person, you need to develop the mentality and the outlook that you're going to remove as many of these things from your future that you possibly can. Do not waste those times of youth. Then we look at number 4. Look at the first part of verse 9. If we did not look at anything but the first part of this verse, we would come away with a very sad view. We would come away with a mentality that we could pretty much live life however we want to live it. Determine our own course. For he says, rejoice, young man, during your childhood. Let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Folks, what if we stopped right there? If we stopped right there, we could make the argument that Solomon is saying, whatever you want to do, you go out and do it. Well, folks, is that not this doctrine that's going around the world today called humanism? That whatever makes you feel good, whatever entices you, just go and do it. Because that's got to be what is acceptable, because that's the natural impulses. But then Solomon goes on to finish out this verse. And he says, "Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all of these things." You know what he's pointing out here? He's pointing out the free will of man. He's pointing out the fact that you and I have the ability to determine the course that we're going to take. We can choose. Are we going to follow God, or are we going to follow man? Are we going to follow after just the natural tendencies of man? Or are we going to submit to the will of God? Place ourselves under His guidance. Solomon says you make the decision. You decide which way you're going to go, but remember, you will answer for those things. Remember, you will be judged based upon the decisions that you make. He's showing us here this balance of life, this balance between free will and submission. Yes, there are many things that we as human beings, we have the free will to decide. But whenever it comes to the things that God has dictated, we do not have that free will if we want to be pleasing to God. We must submit to His will. Because our fourth point is, we are morally and spiritually responsible for how we live. We can't blame it on anybody else, folks. The way that we live, we cannot blame it on anybody else. So often we want to say the devil made us do it. Folks, the devil cannot make you do anything. He can put the temptation out there. He can make it very strong. But God always gives you a way of escape. Satan doesn't make you do anything. You allow yourself to do these things. We will be held accountable for all of those things that we do. So what does Solomon recommend about what we must do to get the most out of life? Folks, he says enjoy it. Enjoy your life to the fullest. Do not be detoured by the obstacles that come along. Don't allow the temptations of Satan and the trials and the tribulations of life. He said, don't allow those things to pull your devotion away from where it needs to be. Be conscious of your responsibility to God. Live that faithful life, and you will live the best life that any person can live. Tonight, if you examine yourself and you find that as a child of God, you've not been living this best life, this abundant life, as Jesus refers to it, then I would encourage you to pay heed to the words of Solomon. Listen to the things that are there. Make application to your life where application is necessary. Make changes in your life if that is what needs be. If you are a child of God and you've strayed away from the truth, you're no longer faithful to God and you need to be restored, come forward and make that known. Let us go to the Father in prayer on your behalf. Or maybe there's someone here tonight who has never obeyed the gospel, and tonight you've decided that this is a decision that you need to make. Your heart has been pricked. You have faith that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. You're willing to turn your life around. You're willing to turn away from a focus upon the world and set your sights on things above. Come forward. Confess that faith that you have in Christ and be baptized. Your sins will all be washed away. You'll be raised to walk in newness of life. You'll be able to leave this place tonight with the confidence of knowing that your life is right with God. Tonight, if you examine yourself and you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, please come while we stand and sing.
There's a fountain free, 'tis for you and me. Let us haste, oh, haste to this spring. 'Tis a fount of love from the source above, and He bids us all freely drink. Will you cry?